This is Fusion Capitalism, a clean energy vision for conservatives. Brought to you by industry leader and company CEO, Steve Malink. Here's Steve.
Welcome back to part 2 of my interview with one of the leading climate scientists on the planet. His name is Mark Jacobson, and he's a professor and researcher at Stanford University. Mark, in part 1, you painted a hopeful scenario where the average person can play a role in climate change. Would you agree that maybe the perception in the past has been that global warming or climate change is too big of a problem? Therefore, the average person saw it as a government problem, even though you are now suggesting it is as much a consumer opportunity?
Oh, yeah. Individuals can do a lot, but also businesses. There are actually around 250 international businesses, including 8 out of the 10 biggest companies of the world, that have committed to 100% renewable energy in their global operations. And the way what they're doing now is they're basically purchasing solar and wind farms, having them built, and then basically then they're offsetting their electricity use with the purchase of these new wind farms and solar farms. So this isn't fake accounting. This is actually building new generation of electricity. And this is driving the transition right now quite a bit. I mean, these companies represent a huge amount of money, and they're putting in a huge amount of money into transitioning their own operations. But so the companies can do it, individuals can do their own thing too. And then governments can then set policies to make it less costly, but also speed up the timeline of the transition. And the fact is, if you do speed up the timeline, you might think, oh, you're all these people who have fossil fuel interests right now are going to lose money. But it saves such a huge amount of money, not only in terms of the health and climate costs due to getting rid of the fossil fuels immediately, but the actual energy costs, as I mentioned, go down substantially. So you're going to save consumers money. I mean, just to give you an example, I mean, I built a new house in 2017, and it's all electric. There's no gas. It has solar on the roof. It has batteries in the garage. It has electric cars, heat pumps for air heating and air conditioning and water heating, LED lights, weatherization and insulation so to prevent heat loss from the home. And I have not paid an electricity bill, a gas bill, or a gasoline bill in 3 years. And not only that, I've gotten paid because I produce 20% more electricity than I use, and my local utility then pays me for that extra electricity, an average of $700 per year for the last 3 years. And so this whole thing pays itself off in 5 years. And on top of it, because on top of that, there are subsidies available. If there were no subsidies, it'd pay itself off in 10 years. However, the solar panels are warranted for 25 years. And so basically, you have free energy after you pay itself off, and it's sustainable. So even though, like right now, there's a heat wave going on in my area, and Pacific Gas and Electric was shutting off people's power cyclically for the last few days, they can shut my power off, but I will still generate electricity and power my home because of the batteries in my garage and the solar on my roof.
That's fantastic. I'd love to hear stories like that. Can you tell us more about China's and India's role in helping solve this climate crisis that we're in?
Well, yeah, every country needs to participate and take an active role, and especially the ones that are huge emitters. Certainly, China is the biggest emitter in the world, and India is among the top 5. Yeah, they have to definitely play a role because, let's say, I mean, some countries, if just some countries take part, they're going to be overwhelmed by emissions from others. I mean, just to give you an example, I think China's emissions are equivalent to the sum of the lowest, 130 countries of the world emissions. So in other words, you can have 130 countries go to entirely clean renewable energy, and if China doesn't do it as well, that's only solving a third of the problem, basically. So we need all countries to participate, but China has done a lot, and India is doing a lot too. When I say done a lot, I mean they not close to what they can or should do, but a lot compared to what a lot of other countries have done. And so they have put in a lot of wind. They're putting in a lot of solar, and their wind is also offshore wind. They have hundreds of thousands of electric buses that have been put in, more than any other country. And most of these, actually, they put in more wind than any other country as well. But the problem is much greater in China because their emissions are so much huger. Proportionally, they're still a minor portion of their total energy production is from renewables, even though the absolute magnitude of their installations are larger than any other country. So we really need a push by all countries not only at the individual level, but at the government level. And in China, it's actually a little bit easier for the government to make changes because, yeah, they can decree that they'll have a certain amount of renewables and it will actually get done. It's not like a debate.
Yeah, interesting. My sense is that China is the largest manufacturer of solar panels and wind turbines in the world. Does that match your understanding?
Well, they're certainly the largest installer of wind turbines. I think they may be the largest installer of solar by now. In terms of manufacturing, possibly solar, I just don't know the numbers. I don't want to
Yeah.
say for
So I'm
sure.
just wondering to what degree the US will become dependent on China for these technologies of the future if unless we develop our own manufacturing base here in the US.
Well, I think like solar panel, the parts come from all over the world. So China's dependent on other countries as well for their manufacturing. I mean, there's a lot of wind is developed in Denmark still. I think like biggest wind companies are still based in Europe, and they're actually, and because the U.S. is growing so much wind power, there are actually a lot of manufacturing has moved to the U.S. and especially with the onset of offshore wind in the U.S. There are a lot of companies chomping at the bit to start manufacturing wind turbines right on the U.S. coastline. I'm not concerned about manufacturing being controlled by China. I think
Okay.
it's more. I mean, especially with solar, the parts are, as I said, are from all over the world, but there might be some parts that are limited where China might control certain rare earths. But there are so many different options in terms of solar for the materials that you can, if one thing is not available, one material is not available, you can often go to a different material. So I think, yeah, there is potential for shenanigans,
Hmm.
but I'm not too worried about that. I think so much is being built and the manufacturing is being expanding. The U.S. definitely does need to ramp up the production, but it's put in a lot of wind and it's put in a lot of solar, and it's
Hmm.
managed to go up
Yeah, I see.
without.
Is it safe to say that we don't need any silver bullets to solve the climate crisis? We have the technology, we know how to engineer, finance these systems. Is there anything missing other than maybe some type of government incentives or action to try to speed up the adoption and scale?
Yeah, I think we have 95% of the technologies we need. The ones we don't have, like our long distance aircraft, long distance ships, but it's not that we can't do that. It's just they haven't been built. Like for long distance aircraft, we'll need hydrogen fuel cell. It's just it'll take like 15
Mhm,
years, to
mhm.
test and prove and make sure they will operate correctly.
And what about hydropower? How big of a part of the solution mix is, hydropower, would you say?
Well, right now, hydropower is a huge portion of global electricity production. When I say huge, I mean it's on the order, I think, of 10% or so globally.
Mhm.
But in terms of the renewables, it's pretty close. Wind is catching up, but hydro for a long time it was the number one renewable for electricity production. It's probably not going to grow a huge amount in terms of we're not going to have new dams, many new dams. There'll be some. There will be probably more what's called run of the river hydro, where you don't actually have a dam, you just have a turbine in the water that takes advantage of the flowing water to create electricity. But it won't be a huge growth. I mean, you're going to see most of it. 90% of the solution will be wind plus solar, and about 6% will be hydro, and most of that is existing, if not all of it. And the rest will be like geothermal, tidal, wave power. Hydro plays some role, but the advantage of hydro is not so much its magnitude, but if you can use it more for peaking power, because the thing with the hydro turbines, it's basically you have water behind a dam. It's like a big battery. You
Sure,
can
that makes sense.
basically open this what's called the sluice gate, and water will start flowing and creating electricity within 15 seconds. So that can replace natural gas in a lot of places for what's called peaking power when the wind's not blowing, the sun's not shining.
I
So
see.
yeah, using that more advantageously is really the value of hydro.
So to end this podcast, I've got a kind of a question that is somewhat concerning in that even though you say 99.9% scientists understand the problem, and I get it, and maybe even the average person, for the most part, gets it and supports it to the degree there's an economic advantage to them, there's still more than enough of a drag on the potential of renewable energy, it seems to me, based on what you read, because people are skeptics of climate change, and there's not a sense of urgency that we need to address this. And as long as that drag exists, whether it comes from the fossil fuel industry and their support of politicians and the politicians' influence on their constituents. How are we going to finally overcome this unless I guess we just wait for the economics of it to become so compelling that forget the problem, as you were kind of suggesting before. Let's just go with the solution.
Right. I think that's the answer because, yeah, you can argue till we're blue in the face. We're not. A lot of people just aren't going to be convinced because they don't want to be convinced, and you don't need to because there is an economic advantage and there's a jobs advantage of clean renewable energy, and it's health. There's a health advantage, even though people don't believe in climate change. Virtually those same people all believe in health problems from air pollution. They've all seen. They can see the pollution with their own eyes often. People may have a relative or a friend who has asthma or cardiovascular disease or respiratory illness or emphysema or some or lung cancer. These are all things that are triggered by air pollution in a large part. And so people do resonate with air pollution health effects. And they also resonate with the fact that renewables create jobs. People who have rooftop solar, they can own their own power. There's a good portion of people who don't believe in climate change. They don't even believe in they don't believe in a lot of things that they don't even believe in health problems, but they do want to own their own energy. And this having solar on your roof is one way to own your own energy and have the government not have so much control over you.
So, and to end on a high note, I guess it sounds like there's a lot of reason to have hope for the future on the problem by focusing on the solution, and that clean energy is really a huge economic opportunity of the 21st century. It could help the U.S. solve many of its problems, not just climate, but as you were saying, jobs, national security, global security, health. Do you agree with that thought that it stands to be one of the greatest opportunities of this century?
Yeah, it's an amazing opportunity. And having transitioned myself, I just feel like, why would everybody not do this? I mean, I haven't paid an electricity or gas or even gasoline bill in 3 years, and I get paid for my extra electricity. I mean, I'm very optimistic we can solve this problem. I'm optimistic we have enough materials and we have the willpower to actually get to transition the world to 100% clean renewable energy. We can only do it if we have the collective willpower, but there's such a benefit of transitioning in terms of reducing energy costs, creating jobs, reducing air pollution health problems, improving international security, reducing environmental impacts such as fewer oil spills, less damage to our landscape. I mean, the United States, 1.3% of all United States land area is used by the fossil fuel industry. And it's covered with not only 2.3 million inactive oil and gas wells and 1.7 million active ones, but millions of miles of pipelines and hundreds of thousands of gas stations and oil refineries and gas storage facilities, etc. You know, if we actually transition to clean renewable energy, we'll use less than 1% of the land area. So there's less land area used on top of all the other benefits. To boot, even if you don't believe in the climate problem, we'll solve the climate problem. So that will reduce costs as well, because climate is causing a huge amount of damage already and will cause a lot of more financial damage in the future.
Mark, thanks for taking the time to educate us on the critical issue of climate change and the solutions to ensure a sustainable planet and environment for our children and grandchildren.
Well, thanks, Steve. I appreciate it.
His name is Mark Jacobson. He is a climate scientist at Stanford University and the author of several books and numerous papers on how to solve the problem of climate change. My name is Steve Malink, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Fusion Capitalism. To find out more about Steve Malink and his book, go to fusioncapitalism.com. This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio.